Hello and welcome to the Gaggle, but we challenge and, if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Szamuely. With me today, of course, is co-founder of the Gaggle, Peter Lavelle. So, Peter, the peace process for Ukraine
So, so
seems
called, so called.
so-called, yeah, seems to have kind of dissipated somewhat.
Yeah, there was like a sugar high there for about a week.
That's
Yeah.
right. We went from the high of the Alaska summit, and then we had the big meeting on Monday with Zelensky and all his European minders. They all trooped off to see Trump, and they had this huge event. But since then, there doesn't seem to be a great deal of activity, and to the contrary, it's looking like all the familiar problems are still there. They have not been
Yeah,
magically
I
willed
could well
away.
imagine what I call the transatlantic booty call. What they're not thinking about Trump's peace process, if that even is it should be called that. But I'm sure they're looking at, oh, did you get the pictures back from the Oval Office? Save this one. Put this one on the door. Okay, send this one to these people. That's what they're good because they made the story about themselves.
Right.
Okay. And the last thing they were thinking about is the stupid guy dressed in, I don't know, my eyesight is so bad right now, I couldn't even tell what he was wearing. Okay. It was just dark. Okay.
Yeah, I don't know. He wanted to get rid of he knew Trump didn't like those fatigues that he was wearing. It was just annoying Trump, but he couldn't quite bring himself to wear a suit and tie. So,
Yeah, it again, that's exactly what a peasant does, okay? You go just a little bit to please the master, but you don't never give the master satisfaction
right.
because you still have that power. You always resist. He was always resisting. And then we heard about how he was coached by Sir Keir, okay?
Yes.
Which I think, does he have I don't know. I'm not going to say it. But I
Right.
mean, Sir Keir has this weird thing about masculinity and men talking, okay?
Yes.
I'll let
So
you take it from there.
the issues that we thought might be the sticking points are kind of still the sticking points, which is the supposed meeting between Putin and Zelensky, and then the supposed security guarantees for Ukraine. So,
And before you go forward, I did read today only one source. I'll let everyone decide in their own mind. Apparently, there's another 2 week deadline in play, but I don't want to overplay it. Okay.
but so anyway, Lavrov, the Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, will be interviewed on NBC, Meet the Press, by that Kristen Walker, the one that you're is the one you say is always over caffeined. But they've released a kind of a brief excerpt from this interview. So let's take a look at just it's this classic, Lavrov with an American journalist. So it's just very brief, just a minute or so.
So bottom line, there's no meeting plan.
President Putin said clearly that he is ready to meet, provided this meeting is really going to have an agenda, presidential agenda.
So that's
An
a big
agenda.
if. There's no meeting planned, Mr. Foreign Minister. That's a big if. You're saying there's no meeting planned right now.
Kristen, I'm awfully sorry, you're not listening. There is no meeting planned, and I'm not challenging this. But you cannot, I think, understand what I am saying. Putin is ready to meet with Zelensky when the agenda would be ready for a summit. And this agenda is not ready at all. President Trump suggested, after Anchorage, several points which we share. And on some of them, we agreed to show some flexibility.
Okay.
When President Trump brought those issues to the meeting in Washington, with Zelensky present together with his European sponsors, he clearly indicated, it was very clear to everybody that there are several principles which Washington believes must be accepted, including no NATO membership, including the discussion of territorial issues. And Zelensky said no to everything. He even said no to, as I said, to canceling legislation
So that was that's a very brief excerpt, and it's more or less what we had expected, namely that the Putin will not meet Zelensky unless there is a very specific agenda and there are, and more or less an agreement to be signed. I mean, I
Yeah.
think, there's nothing short of that. We're actually going to meet to sign an agreement or, negotiate the final, details of an agreement that's ready to go.
And
Um,
I would point out that no paperclip survives a Lavrov interview. Okay. Did you see that?
yes, I did. Very so, yes,
Brutal, brutal.
yes,
Okay.
yes, yes.
No, I mean, okay. I mean, it was June of last year, June 12th, 15th of last
I
year.
can't remember. Yeah, yeah, I think maybe June the 12th. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. The needle hasn't really moved,
No,
George.
no.
I mean, and I apologize to our viewers. I mean, George and I don't embellish. I mean, the terms and conditions of engagement to end this conflict are well known. And Lavrov destroying a paperclip in the process made that clear. Still,
Right,
again.
right, right,
Okay.
right.
And then, and I'm sure we'll get into it shortly, has everybody noticed the discursive shift? Ceasefire, ceasefire, ceasefire. Security guarantees,
That's right.
security guarantees.
That's right.
Okay, that's the discursive shift.
Right.
But the facts on the ground have not
No,
changed, and if they
no.
have changed, they're to the disadvantage of Ukraine.
That's right, and that's really, you're absolutely right. The ceasefire, Trump, ended that, but with his statement after um, Alaska. But then they said, okay, well, security guarantees, but there can't be security guarantees if the fighting continues. And there's no, and
You,
as of as of this moment that we're talking, I don't see any conditions under which Russia would cease the fighting. Why would they? What are they being offered?
why do you cannot, seriously, serious people don't talk about security guarantees until there is a peace to be kept.
Right.
So once you have a peace that can be kept, how can we keep it? Oh, security guarantees to
Right.
keep the peace. We don't have a
There's no
peace.
peace, and there's no reason for Russia to stop because why would they? What is there? So it seems as if uh, Trump himself has become a little bit frustrated by what's happened. So yesterday he sent out a very strange truth, um, and he says here in this truth, it is very hard, if not impossible, to win a war without attacking an invader's country. It's like a great team in sports that has a fantastic defense but is not allowed to play offense. There's no chance of winning. It's like that with Ukraine and Russia. Crooked and grossly incompetent Joe Biden would not let Ukraine fight back, only defend. How did that work out? Regardless, this is a war that would never have happened if I were president. Zero chance. Interesting times ahead.
I
Three
have no
exclamation
idea
points.
what to make of that, George, but it's troubling.
It's
Um,
troubling.
at the very least, because if this is how Donald Trump is, how he conceives and defines this conflict, we're all in trouble.
But also, it's a strange thing for him to say because remember, back when Biden had signed off with the attacks on Russian territory um, with basically medium range missiles, he said, well, there's the ATACMS. He said, well, this is a really bad idea. This is really provocative. We don't want to do that. Um, so now, but now he's saying, well, Ukraine needs to fight back. But even what he's saying here is just simply incorrect. I mean, incorrect. First of all, why a defense can prevail if you can show an attacker that the attacker cannot win. That could be success. I mean, the North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong prevailed. North Vietnam didn't attack the United States. They prevailed by showing that the cost for the United States would just be exorbitant to try to win this war. So so even that's just incorrect. That you always have to go on the offense. A strong defense can prevail. Um, but also Biden did sign off on attacking Russian territory. Ukraine has repeatedly attacked Russian territory, and Ukraine made the attack on Kursk last August 2024. So that's just simply incorrect. That well he didn't allow Ukraine to attack. He did allow Ukraine to attack, and didn't turn out to be very successful.
Well, if Trump wants to um, give the Biden apply some kind of autopsy to the Biden policy, then it would go something like the following: is that the United States and Ukraine's patrons in Europe, they understood very quickly that Ukraine could not win this war. Their policy became and remains one to this day is not allowing a defeat. Okay, which is all nice and fine in theory if you're, you got a mini bar around the corner and you're typing out analysis of how to avoid losing a war. At the same time, Ukraine is being depopulated and deindustrialized. Okay, I mean that is the problem, and Trump. There's flickers of commentary coming from Trump that he understands that this is an unwinnable war. So it's time to wrap it up because the consequences will only compound themselves. I did not see this, George, until right now. I am just
It's very strange.
it's ghastly, is what it is.
Right, it is. And it's very strange for the peace president, the man who was just saying a few days ago, where we're really close to peace, to be talking in this way. And that goes back. Remember when he was talking to Zelensky and said, hey, do you think you can reach Moscow and St. Petersburg with your missiles? And Zelensky, give us the missiles and we'll reach Moscow and St. Petersburg. And then of course, well, the president only meant, he was having a theoretical discussions. Well, presidents don't have theoretical discussions. I mean, that had real implications. And then when he leaves it as interesting times ahead, well, what do you mean by that? What are you issuing a threat here?
Yeah, I mean, George, I mean, my sense of all of this is, and again, it's something we've said with our guests and other venues. I mean, I'm more and more convinced that we have to deal with psychology than anything else. So Trump in his mind said, I went all the way to Anchorage. And then I met these clowns in my own office, these European. I mean, what else do you want from me?
Right.
I think that's his reaction to all of this.
Yeah.
Okay, what about security? Well, yeah, security guarantee. Yeah. We should talk about that.
Right.
I mean, you can't be glib
Yeah.
about these things.
No.
And his whole approach is very glib.
Yeah.
Now, my understanding, and it was borne out after the summit, is that Trump he gets what the Russians are at. They got a case there. I understand.
Yes.
It's not. He's not saying he's embraced it.
Yeah.
I think far from it. But I think he was like, "Whoa!" Well, they look at it so very differently than anyone around me.
Yeah.
Why didn't you tell me this? Okay.
Yep.
And I think it was kind of like a Trump epiphany. But he still thinks, and you see it again with like the body language in the Oval Office. He's leaning forward. He's the schoolmaster. All right, who's going to be spanked next? Okay.
Right.
George and I mused about just before we started this is that there are reports, I'm not confirming it, there are reports that during that White House meeting that Ursula von der Leyen was asked to leave the room because he wanted to talk to the leaders. I can't confirm that. Okay.
I also saw tweets saying that, so from different sources, but I don't know if that's true.
What I'm saying, his force, he thinks his force of personality is going to solve this.
Right. But you see, this is what you said is very important. That when he was in Anchorage, and he listened to the Russians, and it was clear when he came back that he understood the Russians. They don't want NATO on their doorstep, and he says that's perfectly understandable. And then, particularly in that interview that he gave to Fox and Friends, when he said, "Oh, they don't want NATO on their doorstep," he said, "Well, yeah, Ukraine should be a buffer zone between Europe and Russia." So he understood this, that And I have to assume that that's what the Russians really wanted, why they wanted this summit, just to make sure, does Trump understand our case? This is our case. He said, if you start listening to Marco Rubio and listening to Sebastian Gorka, then you're not going to do it. And even when we talked about the other day, when Marco Rubio was interviewed by Margaret Brennan and said, well, what root causes? Right? The root cause of this war is Russia invaded Ukraine. Is that so? I said, well, yeah, I mean, the
Yes,
Russians have their own
but then he
arguments.
said, but I don't want to get into
Yeah,
it.
but I don't want to get into it. But he knew that there was another side to it. I mean, he knew that. But Margaret Brennan had no idea that there was another side to it. So so anyway, this is Trump is very mercurial. Let's say that the here he seems to be getting very irritated that nothing is moving. And here, this is a story today from Reuters saying Putin's demand to Ukraine give up Donbass, no to NATO, no to Western troops. So it's a very familiar story,
Yeah.
basically demanding Ukraine give up all of Eastern Donbass, renounce ambitions to join NATO, remain neutral, keep Western troops out of the country, and then
This is being reported as news.
that's what it was today, and it's exclusive. And I had exactly the same thought that this is this, and even antiwar.com ran with this story as if this is somehow late breaking story. And then someone and so Russia control blah blah, and then Putin is sticking to his previous demands that Ukraine give up its NATO ambitions and for legally blinding pledge from the US-led military alliance that it will not expand further eastwards. That I think may be new. The league that they're now insisting on a legally binding pledge that as part of any deal.
Well, not to contradict you, it can be running in parallel, but I would not be surprised if this was part of the last minute appeal on December 15th of 2021.
Right. No, that would absolutely they made that clear. But the fact that they're doing it now,
Yeah.
that I think is interesting. And as well as limits on the Ukrainian army and an agreement that no Western troops will be deployed on the ground in Ukraine as part of a peacekeeping force. But what happened to the security guarantees? I mean, a lot of this problem arose when Witkoff he went on on the show and said that the Russians had accepted a kind of Western security guarantees. Marco Rubio did not say that, but Witkoff said this, and I think that's what I think caused a lot of excitement.
But we weren't in the room, but George, I can well imagine in Ankara, Putin or Lavrov or another member of his team said, "We'd like to point out to you, Mr. President, is that in Istanbul, we almost inked a deal in which Russia agreed to security guarantees to be
Absolutely.
part of those security guarantees,
Yep.
including hypothetically maybe a country like China."
Yep.
And I think that maybe so, and I'm only
Right.
surmising here, everyone.
Right.
But Witkoff said, "Oh yeah, they agreed to security guarantees," and he took
Yeah.
it in a
Yeah,
different
no,
direction.
I'm sure that's the right that he simply isn't knowledgeable enough to realize that what the Russians were talking about security guarantees is very different from what NATO is talking about. But nonetheless, the way when he said that, they all leapt at this Keir and Macron. Oh yeah, security guarantees. Now this is the interview that Trump gave to Fox and Friends, and here he's saying Lawrence Jones said. Well, they all look the same page as you, sir. And he said, yeah, very good people. They're very good people. They're good leaders of their countries. I thought he was now going to say, and their countries are fantastic. and,
It was a perfect meeting.
it was a perfect meeting. And they want to get back to leading their country. They're consumed far more with this than we are because they're right there. We have an ocean separating us, right? Thing called an ocean, a big beautiful ocean, and they don't. They're right there. So they have to, it's a different kind of thing for them. When it comes to security, they're willing to put people on the ground. We're willing to help them with things, especially probably if you talk about air, because there's nobody has the kind of stuff we have. That's that's all that Trump has said, that America is willing to provide air support for these security guarantors. This kind of offhand remarks, well, yeah, they want to put people, maybe, probably, if you could talk about it, air, we might have air support, but there's no real. He hasn't made any
Well,
commitment
I
by
mean,
air support.
yeah, but George, one could, and maybe this is a reach here. Yeah, we have transport planes. We could bring equipment and land it in, and because your country is a NATO country, you don't have a lot of really big planes,
Yeah.
and the big planes are, they were made by us because we make the best, of course, right? And so, I mean, I'm trying to be very elastic in my thinking here right now. So, for a logistical thing, you want us to help, move your stuff around.
Right,
Talk to a general about that.
right,
But
right.
of course, people that are paying attention, this sounds like a no-fly zone,
Right.
which
No, no, he never said anything like that. He could mean transport. He could mean air support for their operations. He could mean putting in American air defense systems and so on. So we don't know exactly what he meant. I don't think the Russians will accept any of that, even air transport, American air transports. That wouldn't do for them.
what I'm just saying is that, and I'm trying to be elastic in my thinking. This could be very benign.
Oh yeah,
Okay.
yeah. No, I agree, and that's the point. That's all he said. So all the talk in the media, oh, Trump says he's going to provide air support. The only basis for that claim that he's going to provide air support is this comment that he made on this interview, and that's what he said. Probably if you could talk about by air, because there's nobody has the kind of stuff we have, and that's it. I wouldn't take that to the bank that Trump is offering air support for the European forces. Um, anyway, and then he says, really, they don't have, but I don't think it's going to be a problem. I think if a deal is made that, famous last words, right? But I think if a deal is made, I think Russia's had it. They've all had it. And for a very extended period of time, I don't think there'll be a problem. But there'll be some form of security. It can't be NATO because that's not just something that would ever happen. They couldn't do that. And I think, is that it? Yeah, no, who would want that? I mean, if you were Russia, who would want to have your enemy, your opponent sitting on your line? You don't do that. So it was always thought that Ukraine was a sort of buffer between Russia and the rest of Europe, and it was a big wide buffer. Everything worked out well until Biden got involved. When Biden gave them $100 billion right up front. So
I must admit, George, you do read that well because I can't read it. Okay, I would never. I'm too dyslexic. You can read broken English well.
yeah, that's broken. It is always broken English, but you can see what he's getting at here. I mean, you can, and I think that's the point, that he's understood what the Russians said to him, and so he's saying, well, who would want that, to have your enemy or your opponent sitting on your line? You don't do that. So that was, and so so it was always thought that Ukraine was a sort of buffer between Russia and the rest of Europe. This is way, way beyond anything NATO has ever said, what Biden or any of those people said. And he said, yeah, it's a buffer, and that's sensible talk from him. That the only way you can have some kind of security in Europe is precisely if it's a buffer. It's
I would go as far as to say, if you were to let's say people that are mildly informed with public affairs, and you said there's a country, we're going to call it X, and there is a military alliance, we're going to call it A. And they have this problem here with this thing in the middle. What do you think the best thing to do? Maybe just make it a buffer zone. And most people, yeah, they don't like them and they don't like them. Why don't you just separate them?
right,
Okay.
right,
Trump is thinking in a very kind of logical, intuitive
right,
way.
right.
The bone of contention is this area here. Why don't we just clear it out and everybody go home?
That's right. Exactly. I think that's exactly it. the way he's thinking. And that's why I think the Russians, they never say anything negative about him. It's always very respectful because they say, oh, Trump understands our position. And I think Trump does understand, saying, hey, the only way we're going to have security and stability in Europe is precisely if you create this buffer, that it has a status of a neutral state, and then everyone can feel safe. But if you're going to move NATO in there, then that's just going to be explosive. And Trump, I think, has understood that. But with Trump, it's like he suddenly sends out this truth yesterday. So anyway, this is the commentary from Zaharova. And here she says, clearly, and this is the Russian position, we have reaffirmed our repeatedly voiced position on our categorical rejection of any scenarios that envisage the appearance in Ukraine of a military contingent with the participation of NATO countries, which is fraught with an uncontrolled escalation of the conflict with unpredictable consequences. Statements on this matter by individual European countries, including Great Britain, essentially record their openly provocative and predatory aspirations in the Ukrainian direction. So that's just so they kind of repeated that point. They're not going to accept these security guarantees provided by these NATO member states. And then Lavrov said this. This was saying it the other day. And this was quite interesting because he talks here about the declaration of state sovereignty in 1990. So this really preceded the breakup of the Soviet Union. So it preceded the independence of Ukraine. So the declaration of state sovereignty, in which Ukraine did say that it would be neutral, it was still a member. It was still a Soviet Socialist Republic at that stage. This is 1990, and that's really and that declaration was accepted by the Russian Parliament. So they were issuing these declarations of state sovereignty. The Russian Parliament accepted that declaration. So that's more or less the only legal document that exists between Russia and Ukraine, because the independence, that was wholly illegal. There's no legal basis for any of that. What happened at Belarus? No republic has the right to dissolve the Soviet Union. I mean, that was just an absurdity that they got together at Belarus and just simply, the three of them decided to dissolve the Soviet Union. That had no legal basis according to the Constitution of the USSR. So as far as the Russians are concerned, well, this is the only legal document, which is the Declaration of National Sovereignty. And there, they said there would be neutral and non-aligned state. So it was this commitment that formed the basis of the international recognition of Ukraine as an independent state. So he sort of says, it is now, if now the regime of Zelensky rejects all these characteristics, talks about nuclear weapons, about joining NATO, about renunciation of neutrality, then the provisions that underlie the recognition of Ukraine as an independent state disappear. It's important to pay attention to this. Otherwise, it turns out that the decisive role will again be played not by the principles of international law, but by the rules that the West has never formulated anywhere. So he's more or less saying we're not obligated by any of the decisions that we made in 1990, like recognition of Ukraine's borders or anything else, because Ukraine is violating the declaration of state sovereignty.
This is, it's hard to comprehend how important this statement is,
right?
Because rejects all these characteristics. It talks about nuclear weapons, about joining NATO, about renunciation of neutrality. Well, Ukraine going down that path in the Russia's legal reaction to that is that then Ukraine no longer exists as a sovereign state. That's serious business, George.
Right.
Wow. This is very, very important.
That's right. And so we're not under no obligation any longer to recognize, Ukrainian territory or any of the other things. The basis on which we accepted your international frontiers was on that basis of what you declared in 1990, that Declaration of State Sovereignty. That's all it was. So we're under no obligation to recognize that once you have violated, the promises that you made in 1990.
The very basis of Russia's recognition as an independent Ukrainian state.
Right, exactly. And then here's Lavrov saying about this. So he was asked, well, what about what are these recognition, about these meetings, and then he said, well, we can have any kind of formats and whatever, but any contacts with the participation of top officials must be prepared with the utmost care. Well, we know this. I mean, Zelensky has no interest at all in a serious negotiation. I mean, he's going to come. Imagine if there was a summit. He would arrive with all his minders. They would all show up for any summit, and it's just going to be a clown show.
It would just be choreographed. There would be no substance to it. It would just be at this point, take off your jacket and throw water at somebody. Okay,
right. That's right. That's right. And then, but here the EU is already they rushed after that meeting. Costa. A lot of people don't know who Costa is. Antonio Costa is the president of the EU Council. That's a very senior position. That's the that he has seniority over Ursula von der Leyen.
Yeah, that's like big Politburo stuff, guys.
That's right, exactly, President. So he said, the European Union and allies must match the intense diplomatic activity to end Russia's war in Ukraine with increased practical work to provide Kiev with security pledges, including a NATO's Article 5-like guarantee, says Antonio Costa. NATO's Article...
Now we have... Okay, here we go. We got to keep a list. Article 5, like.
Article 5.
I've already seen Article 5, light, spelled like light in the room, not L-I-T-E. What a moron that wrote that. George and I are going to keep track. Okay, so we have Article 5, like. We have Article 5, light. Okay, and we have Article 5, light. Okay, so keep that on your ledger there. There's 3 of there, which is complete nonsense.
Of course it is.
So you're not a member of the club, but we give you a key to the locker.
That's right. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, that's very, very nice. So you're not, but you just get this free of charge. You get you got these security guarantees. Well, that's really very nice. Did anyone in Europe get consulted about this? Oh, by the way, we're providing security guarantees to Ukraine, who's not a member of NATO, which could mean World War III with Russia. Do you mind? No, by all means, go right ahead.
It's like creating a false. This is a false binary here. Do you agree to have Ukraine in NATO? Of course not. Do you agree to have Article 5 like guarantees? Oh, I don't know. Oh, come on. Okay. See, what they're doing is, again, they're parsing it in a different way. Oh, it's just Article 5. Right. Well, everybody, that is the heart.
That's the heart
of what NATO is all about. Okay.
That's right.
So, they can't be a member of NATO, but we're going to give them the most important element of NATO membership is collective security.
That's right.
You've got to be out of your mind. And these people are so despicable because they lie through their teeth.
They lie through their teeth. That's exactly right. That's what they did. You see, they exactly said, you want Ukraine in NATO? No. That's off the table. That's off the table. Okay. What about this Article 5 like guarantee? Well, what is that? Oh, let's just, we'll just provide some security guarantees. That's all. Oh, well, that's all right. That doesn't sound too bad.
A couple of security guards,
Exactly. Exactly. Some, a few soldiers, from Britain, not doing anything very much, having a pint at the pub, that's it. Oh, that sounds all right. Doesn't sound too bad. They're lying. That's exactly what you're saying. They're lying and they're deliberately deceiving the public as to what they're up to. And here's the leader, one of the leaders of the coalition of the willing, Keir Starmer, who says that Turning to the next steps, the Prime Minister outlined a coalition of the willing planning teams would meet with their US counterparts in the coming days to further strengthen plans to deliver robust security guarantees and prepare for the deployment of a reassurance force if the hostilities ended. Now, of course, that is quite a caveat, if the hostilities ended.
Well,
And
Sir Keir, why don't you really, why don't you really man up, okay? Because you need to prove that to a lot of people right now. Why don't you just send him now? Go ahead,
I agree. I
big
agree.
guy, tough
Exactly.
guy.
Exactly. Send them now. Yeah, exactly. But I always feel like whenever people start talking, oh, Trump isn't willing to do this or Trump isn't willing. Well, why don't you go? I mean, you're berating, Trump's pusillanimity. Hey, grab a gun, get a backpack, and off you go. Um, the leaders also discussed how further pressure, including through sanctions, could be placed on Putin until he showed he was ready to take serious action to end his illegal invasion. Now, this puzzled me. So, if this paragraph, you're talking about sending in this reassurance force if the hostilities ended. And then he said, oh, well, but we're also talking about the actions that we're going to take against Putin to end his illegal invasion. But I don't understand. I mean, why are we talking about a reassurance force and security guarantees if the illegal invasion is still going on? And here's Macron. He calls Putin a predator and an ogre. Them strong words.
From such a little man.
Predator.
I mean, I think he has predator issues at home. Okay, I think that Macron needs security guarantees. Okay,
Maybe so, but so those are strong words. This is what's so remarkable. He's whipping up this hysteria. At the moment, we're supposedly this is the peace process. So, we're having a peace process, and he's talking like this about Putin. Never in the Cold War did leaders talk like that about the Soviet leaders. Nobody said Stalin is a predator and an ogre, or Brezhnev is a predator and an ogre. It's kind of remarkable, completely over the top language.
yeah. Well, but George, when you're playing with sixes and sevens, then you resort to this. Okay,
Right.
see, this is the rhetoric of desperation. I'm going to start calling you names now. I mean, come on, let's be serious. Can we be grown-ups?
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Oh, he's a predator.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And there he says, hardening his tone as talks to end the war in Ukraine gather pace, which then you think, why would he be
Wouldn't
hardening?
it be the reverse?
Exactly. I mean, don't you want to soften your tone if talks to end the war are gathering pace?
Well, and also this is a jab at Daddy, at Trump. Okay.
Right.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Right. Yes. Um, President Macron called Vladimir Putin a predator and an ogre at our doorstep. Predator and an ogre at our doorstep. The statement, made in an interview with the French TV news network LCI that was broadcast on Tuesday, was consistent with Mr. Macron's recent warnings that Mr. Putin is not to be trusted, but he was blunter and harsher than his previous characterizations of the Russian leader.
Yeah, well, during the course of this conflict, who's called Putin a number of times? Macron, at least in the beginning.
At
Okay.
least in the beginning. But they used to have cordial relations. You remember in 2019, Putin visited France. Um, and it wasn't just Paris. I think it was where Macron's kind of, country estate, his, where he spends his Augusts. It was somewhere in the south of France. So that he invited Putin there, and then of course there was the meeting. I think it was in Paris in December of 2019 when with Zelensky. That was the Normandy format, which was
Oh,
also
wow.
yeah.
Least we forget. Oh, my
Exactly.
goodness.
Yes,
That's right.
that's right. Yeah. Um, Anyways, speaking after the meeting in Washington on Monday between President Trump and President Zelensky, the French president called Mr. Putin a destabilizing force who needs to eat for his own survival. This appeared to be an allusion to the 2022 Russian invasion aimed at swallowing Ukraine and to Moscow's earlier predations in Crimea and Georgia. So this is the New York Times puts that word in, earlier predations in Crimea and Georgia.
Thank you, New York Times, for
That's right.
spoon feeding us.
Clarifying it for us. Oh, that's it.
Yeah,
Yeah, thank you. And then, but this is also any Axios, Rubio to lead Ukraine's security guarantees talks with Trump promising air support, which he hasn't promised. Senior officials from the US, Ukraine, and several European countries are expected to work in the coming days on the detailed proposal for security guarantees for Ukraine, likely involving US air power. Two sources with knowledge of the discussions tell Axios US and European security guarantees are a key Ukrainian demand. After months of refusing to discuss the issue, President Trump has come around to the idea of US involvement in.
So according to Axios here, which I have to, even though I have grudging respect for Axios, considering the media environment that we live in here, um, um, you know, if this in fact is true, this is Biden's policy on steroids.
Right. Yeah,
Because
that's right.
because this is the complete reverse of what Trump claims that he's interested in. This is a huge escalation. American pilots flying American planes over Ukraine
Right.
without discussing this with the Russians.
Right.
That's war,
That's what.
everyone.
That's right. That's right.
Do you think the Russians are going to allow American fighter jets to roam?
You're
They could
absolutely
be carrying nuclear-tipped missiles.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Even Biden didn't go there.
Even Biden didn't do that.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So I guess he thinks that he thinks that I have a personal relationship with Putin, and Putin's going to accept this because it's coming from me. I think he doesn't really understand this business of concept of personal relations. Yeah, I mean they have courtesy. He's not gonna, the Russians aren't going to accept this kind of nonsense from the Americans. Whatever, whether he likes Trump personally or not.
Well, and also they cut through it all. I mean, needless, I think we have to say this. I mean, um, I don't know what the personal relationship is between Putin and Trump, and I personally don't really care
Oh,
either. But
no,
the Russian high command is going to say, Mr. Putin, this is a grave existential threat to the existence of our country. And Putin is not going to disagree with them.
right,
Okay.
right,
Okay.
right.
I mean, it's just not like, Putin waves a wand and he gets his will. It doesn't work that way. It
No,
never works that way anywhere.
no. You're absolutely right. And that's why when Macron talks about Putin is this and Putin is that, you don't seem to understand that you're talking about the entire Russian leadership. I mean, you're talking about, at the entire the top brass in the military, in the defense ministry, in the foreign ministry. All of it's not just Putin. Putin just doesn't just simply command and then everyone falls into line. So, but that's the way it's always presented. And as for the personal relations, none of that ever really mattered. Stalin had good personal relations with Churchill. Stalin had good personal relations with FDR. That didn't mean anything. Each of these characters, the big three, they were there to represent their country's interests. And they knew they were representing their interests. Whatever, whether, Stalin kind of liked Churchill, I think on a personal level, I think quite liked him. I think Churchill on a personal level quite liked Stalin. Doesn't matter.
I don't remember if it was for Stalin, I mean for Churchill, or if it was for Roosevelt. And this is a fun story about rapport. I think it was FDR, and they were having vodka martinis. It was his first night at Yalta. And I don't know if it was Roosevelt said, "Do you have any lemons?" Or Stalin said, "Sorry, we don't have any." I think it was Roosevelt and maybe some lemons. Well, they didn't have any lemons. It was the dead of winter. It was cold, in the middle of a raging war. But the next night, Stalin presented him with a not lemons, but a lemon tree. Okay. And it was brought to his residence. So you can have a lemon anytime you want. Okay. Did that mean Stalin trusted
No,
Roosevelt?
absolutely no,
Absolutely
not for
not.
one moment, not for one moment. Um, anyway, so here, two sources with the knowledge of the issue said a U.S. European Ukrainian commission was formed to draft proposal for security guarantees. What's missing here? Oh, the Russians are not involved. Then I think that's not going to work. That's not going to fly. A security guarantee. U.S. European Ukrainian commission was formed to draft a proposal for security guarantees. The commission is headed by Secretary of State Marco Rubio, with national security advisors from Ukraine and European countries. In the coming days, everyone is going to be working from sunrise till dark on the security guarantees, a Ukrainian official said. Well,
Of course, a Ukrainian official would
listen,
say.
I wouldn't lose any sleep, to be honest. I mean, not worth going without a good night's sleep for this. But the Politico kind of pours a little bit of cold water on this, and I think this is coming from Elbridge Colby, who's kind of one of the more intelligent figures within the administration. He's the number 3 man in the Pentagon. He's the policy chief in the Pentagon, and he says Pentagon says U.S. will play a minimal role in Ukraine's security guarantee.
So full night's sleep.
Exactly. Yes. Don't go without sleep. Meetings between NATO and U.S. defense officials left allies concerned that President Donald Trump would leave Europe to ensure a lasting peace in the war-scarred country. Leave Europe. Okay, you go. You go ahead. And it says the Pentagon's top policy official told a small group of allies Tuesday night that the U.S. plans to play a minimal role in any Ukraine security guarantees, one of the clearest signs yet that Europe will need to shoulder the burden of keeping lasting peace in Kiev. The comments from Elbridge Colby, the defense undersecretary for policy, came in response to questions from European military leaders in a huddle led by Joint Chiefs Chair General Kane. And then we have the defense chiefs from UK, France, Germany, and Finland pushed the US side to disclose what it would provide in troops and air assets to help Ukraine maintain a peace deal with Russia. So they kept pushing the US, and Colby said, I wouldn't count on too much.
Don't take that to the bank, guys.
That's right. And this is again is an interesting. This was Lavrov when he was with the foreign minister of Jordan, and he was asked about this. The France, Germany, and Great Britain want to deploy their troops in Ukrainian territory. He also does not rule out or according to President Trump, he also does not rule out the possibility of Washington providing air support. How does Moscow assess this scenario? We are monitoring what is happening in the international community, including in the Western camp, regarding the processes that are unfolding around Ukraine. And as for the reports that they want to develop collective security guarantees, we are in favor of guarantees being truly reliable. And then, of course, we have a good example that relates to the initiative of the Ukrainian side itself. This was in Istanbul in April 2022, when the Ukrainian negotiating team proposed the basic principles of agreements on ending hostilities and ensuring a sustainable settlement. Among those principles was Ukraine's refusal to join NATO or any military bloc, confirmation of Ukraine's neutral and non-nuclear status. In this context, the Ukrainian side proposed, and our delegation then agreed to develop security guarantees to which all permanent members of the UN Security Council would be participants.
There you go, everybody.
Exactly. And just in case, we cannot agree that now collective security issues are proposed to be resolved without the Russian Federation. This will not work. We have already explained more than once that Russia does not overstate its interests, but we will ensure our legitimate interests firmly and harshly. I am sure that in the West, especially in the United States, they understand perfectly well that seriously discussing issues of ensuring security without the Russian Federation is a utopia. It's a road to nowhere.
Just as an observation, George, we do this a lot, many times a week.
Yeah.
Is there one Western leader or foreign minister or foreign secretary, whatever, that can actually speak in that length, just
Right.
sentence after Macron? All these people, it's a soundbite.
Yes.
He's a predator.
Yes.
Okay. I mean, we never get any substance here.
Right.
Here, and we don't scoop Foreign Minister Lavrov, obviously, but when George and I started this video about security guarantees, we instantly went to
Right.
Istanbul.
That's
Okay.
right. That's
Why?
right.
Because we
That's right.
patiently go through the literature, go through the
That's right.
public record.
And just in case people have forgotten, when we did a long podcast, you remember last year when the New York Times published the details of what was discussed in Istanbul, and here,
Which we knew in
Oh, yeah.
real time.
That's
Okay,
right.
sorry.
Of course, no, you're absolutely right. In Istanbul, the Russians seem to endorse Ukraine's model of neutrality and security guarantees and put less emphasis on their territorial demands. Afterwards, Mr. Medinsky, Russia's lead negotiator, who is still Russia's lead negotiator, and said Ukraine's offer of neutrality meant it was ready to fulfill those principal demands that Russia insisted on for all the past years. And then goes on, the communique provided to the Times by a Ukrainian negotiator described a mechanism in which other countries would intervene militarily if Ukraine were attacked again, a concept that the Ukrainians pointedly designated as Article 5, a reference to the mutual defense agreements in Article 5 of the NATO treaty. However, to the Ukrainians, binding security guarantees were at the core of a potential peace deal that multiple countries would sign on to, and then they, possible guarantor states. And you could see China's there, Turkey is there, and
even NATO countries like Great Britain, France,
that's
Turkey,
right.
Germany,
That's
Italy,
That's right.
Canada, Poland.
That's right. And then the guarantor states and Ukraine agreed that in the event of aggression, any armed attack on Ukraine or any military operation against Ukraine, each of the guarantor states, after urgent and immediate consultations between them, will provide assistance to Ukraine as a permanently neutral state under attack. But then the Russians made the, I think, important and necessary change. The biggest problem, however, came in Article 5. It stated that in the event of another armed attack on Ukraine, the guarantor states that would sign the treaty would come to Ukraine's defense. But Russia tried to secure a veto by inserting a clause requiring unanimous consent. And that I think is
Russia's consent. Right.
That's right. You have to, because otherwise it does become NATO by the back door. If they can just simply decide at any moment, oh, Ukraine is under attack, we need to come to Ukraine's defense, even though, it's Ukraine that's provoked this military confrontation. That's why it was important that there has to be consent, unanimous consent. Russia tried to secure a veto on Ukraine's security guarantees by inserting a clause requiring unanimous consent. The guarantor states and Ukraine agree that in the event of an armed attack on Ukraine, each of the guarantor states, on the basis of a decision agreed upon by all guarantor states, so they would all have to agree, will provide assistance to Ukraine as a permanently neutral state under attack. But this is really how these kinds of guarantees work. Because otherwise, then any one of the guarantor states can just simply, decide, oh, Ukraine's under attack, therefore Article 5 goes into effect. So you had to have an agreement by all the guarantor states. And that's what the Russians are talking about now. I mean, that's clearly their negotiating position now. But the point is that it's very different. I mean, the whole idea that they were ever going to accept what NATO is talking about, that they're just simply going to accept a kind of a NATO guarantee, in other words, a de facto NATO membership for Ukraine, and Russia was just simply going to sit on its hands. Oh, okay, fine, we don't have a problem. I mean, it's ludicrous. given the historical record and given everything that Lavrov is saying. Lavrov is explaining patiently, and he's been doing that now day after day, of exactly what the Russian position is. And here we have again with Lavrov. This was yesterday when he was meeting with the Indian foreign minister, and he says, speaking about security guarantees for Ukraine, who and how, from Moscow's point of view, should ensure new possible agreements, taking into account the negative experience of the Minsk agreements. And then it says, there is experience not only in relation to the Minsk agreements. Let me remind you that in April 2022, several weeks after the start of the special military operation, negotiations were underway. They began in Belarus, then continued in Istanbul. And then these were negotiations on resolving the conflict based on eliminating the root causes of its occurrence. And the discussion was about ensuring this security honestly and collectively. First of all, by creating a group of guarantor countries, which would include permanent member countries of the UN Security Council. Germany and Turkey were mentioned. The list of those guarantors would be open for any willing countries to join. These countries would guarantee Ukraine's security essentially in line with the logic underlying the Article 5 of the Washington Treaty on the establishment of NATO, but it was emphasized that Ukraine would remain a non-nuclear, neutral, and non-aligned state and would not join NATO or any other military alliance. And then, by the way, these components, neutrality and non-nuclear, were those all part of the Declaration of Sovereignty. But then he goes on. Now, following the Russian-US summit in Alaska, where significant progress was made in defining the contours and specific parameters of the settlement, European countries followed Zelensky to Washington and tried to advance their agenda aimed at ensuring that security guarantees are built on the logic of isolating Russia, uniting the Western world with Ukraine in order to continue the aggressive confrontational policy of containing the Russian Federation, still meaning inflicting a strategic defeat. This cannot evoke in us any feelings other than complete rejection. Moreover, the Ukrainian regime and its representatives comment on the current situation in a very specific way, directly showing that they are not interested in a sustainable, fair, long-term settlement. And then let me emphasize once again that Russia has always been for an honest conversation and for the principles of security guarantees that were agreed upon at the initiative of the Ukrainian delegation in Istanbul. We supported them then and we support them today because they are truly based on the principles of collective security and indivisibility of security. Anything else, anything unilateral, is an absolutely hopeless undertaking. As the West discussion with the Ukrainian side now show, all these plans are connected with the provision of guarantees through foreign military intervention in some part of Ukrainian territory. So that's the Russian position. And of course, the Western powers, they're making all these plans. They're not listening. And, that's why when Lavrov said to Kirsten Walker, you're not listening to what I'm saying. And you're not listening to what the Russian position is. And that's why you get into trouble. Because you're only listening to yourselves. You're constantly meeting and coming to.
Well, yeah, but see, that's the symbiotic relationship. Is that a Ukrainian official speaking with an American official, quoting or claiming they understand what Trump said about air power, and all of a sudden it's a little cottage industry, and the media picks up on it and they run with it.
They run with
it.
Yeah.
The media is it's generating its own reality.
Right.
Where this is just a house of cards. It's not even a house of cards. It's just built on sand. It's just
That's right.
It just drop.
That's right.
There's no any meaningful context to this. Go to antiwar.com. Go to security guarantees. This is all an illusion. It's all part of a Western strategy. We went from ceasefire, security guarantees.
That's right.
But the meaning has not changed whatsoever. Lavrov just put it there to inflict a strategic defeat on Russia. That is the So they'll, sanctions, tariffs,
Right.
ceasefire. The flavor of the moment can change at any time, but the goal that they have is never
No,
changed.
no, that's it. It never changes, and that's why they somehow think that the Russians are going to buy into this nonsense. I don't know if they actually think that Russians are going to buy into this,
No,
but
they
they
want Russia to be. See, it's the Russians that don't want peace. That's
right.
what they want.
That's what you're absolutely right. That's the whole point, so that they can turn around and say, "Oh, the Russians are in the way of peace," even though the Russians have made clear what the conditions are for the peace. And so now, the Russians have agreed to security guarantees. Oh, the Russians have agreed to Trump providing air support for NATO forces in Ukraine. And so where did they agree to any of this? And there's no way. So then they can continue, and then Sakir can say, "Oh, the Russians are clearly not interested in bringing this to an end, or they're not into Putin is not interested in peace." And then and then that's it. But it's a total fantasy, and so the war goes on. I mean, there's nothing here. There's no indication that there's anything that's going to stop this, the war going on. Trump had his chance,
He
but
had his
instead of
chance.
he had his chance, but instead of confronting this phalanx of warmongers, he kind of played along with them. To be honest, I mean, I think you should have brought Viktor Orban and Robert Fico in that meeting, and listen to what they had to say. Say, hey, well, they represent NATO too. I mean, what do they have to
Look,
say?
that's such an amazing observation. I think that was a choreographical mistake on the part of the White House. You're absolute. That's brilliant. I really
Yeah,
like that.
yeah,
But as they discuss security guarantees, there's less of Ukraine to secure.
yeah,
This is a circle jerk of unbelievable proportion. You want to talk about securing Ukraine as it's being destroyed. I mean, it's just nonsensical, particularly since the whole issue of security guarantees were discussed in the
yeah,
first few weeks of the conflict.
yep. That's right.
You see how this works? Everything is started today.
Yep.
Everything is today.
Right.
They don't take a, I mean, to the point of being just total geeks. George and I spent an entire podcast on the history, the origins, and the meaning of the whole Helsinki process and the OSCE. I mean, do you think, George, that Macron knows about any of these things? I don't know. He probably knows that the OSCE was on our side, right? Yeah, they were on our side in Ukraine, as if it was supposed to take sides, okay?
Right.
This is so much corruption and dishonesty here.
Yes.
Oh yeah, the Russians don't want peace because they won't let American F-35s roam through the skies of Ukraine. That's what they're
That's how
selling.
exactly. That's how they present it, and of course they get away with it because the media are doing such a terrible job, because the media are basically an echo chamber for these governments, for NATO, and the media repeat all the stuff about Putin, 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 Putin. So Putin ready for peace? And, that's kind of the level of their the ridiculous nonsense. And because of that, they don't understand, what's really going on. And I think that when just as we were talking about Marco Rubio, so well, yeah, they got, the Russians have a whole case that they make about NATO encroachment, but we don't have to talk about this now.
I don't
Well,
want to get into it, George.
yeah, we don't want to get into it
I don't
now.
want to get into it. Okay. Your Excellency, excuse
You're
me.
exactly, but the thing, well, you're not going to resolve any conflict unless you have some understanding of what the other side is doing and what their ideas are, what their goals are. If you're just going to talk among yourselves, then you're just going to get exactly the same
Well,
result.
I mean, I wouldn't be surprised. Seriously, I wouldn't be surprised. Um, And someone whispers into Trump's ear, Putin wants to meet Zelensky. And then he's going to start writing about it. The meeting is in 10 days. It's going to be in the UAE or something. And, if they want me to be, which would be completely false,
Right.
completely false.
Right.
And the media say, oh, but Putin doesn't want to show up because he doesn't want to have peace. It's in the card. Watch. It's going to happen.
Absolutely.
It's going to happen eventually. Oh, it was already agreed to, but he doesn't show up. They're going to do it.
That's right. No, absolutely, and they're doing it now. I mean, they did that when was it? When you remember, with a couple of months ago, when Putin offered to reopen the Istanbul talks, and right away the media ran with the story. Oh, Putin offers to meet Zelensky. Completely false. They said nothing of the sort. Oh, Putin's offered to meet Zelensky, and then and they said, oh, Putin didn't show up. Putin was too scared to show up to meet Zelensky in Istanbul. He never said he was going to meet Zelensky. He just said, we're going to reopen the talks in Istanbul. And said, without any conditions, we're going to reopen the talks. Never
Even
said
here on this
up.
podcast here, Lavrov was asked, would Putin be willing to meet Zelensky? Yes, under certain conditions.
Right.
Okay.
Yes, that's right. But it's like people.
Oh, and it means it's conditioned. That means he's afraid. Okay,
That's
all
right. But
it's dealing with someone with a chronic mental illness. Okay.
But it is. But this is why it's so peculiar, because he says yes under certain conditions, and normally, like as adults, we kind of listen to the whole sentence. We don't just sort of listen to the first part, yes, and then so, oh, that's it. He's agreed to meet Zelensky under certain.
Run to the press, write it down, tweet it. Yeah.
It's just such a bizarre take. And you think Trump should know better, because the guy does real estate deals. I mean, you're dealing with very sophisticated financial people. They go through documents with a fine tooth comb. They dot their I's and cross their T's and everything.
I'm sure Trump pays his lawyers well.
Exactly. They don't just sort of you listen to the first part. Yeah, we're ready to do a deal, but the numbers have to make sense. I mean, that's the part that you have to listen to. The numbers have to make sense for us. So it's just so. But what I think is so striking is that the Russian position has not changed. I mean, you go through that, we can go all the way back. December 2021, even further back than that. But
that's what
doesn't change.
That's what's really remarkable about us, I'm sorry, responsible statecraft comes to my mind, but we're given kind of the easy job in a way, because we just have to look how Western policymakers and their pliant media so how are they tying themselves into a pretzel today?
Right.
Because when you look at the Russian position, it's static.
Right.
It's static.
Right.
So of course, I'm following what George does. Look at the foreign ministry, and I look at TASS and all of that. But for me, it's just just in case. I got to know, the playing field, right? But I can't wait tomorrow morning to go into anti-war.com. It's like, oh wow, I didn't know this was a development, because it's a develop in someone's mind. Oh, yeah, air cover, air. What was the exact phrase? Air
support.
Air support. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, well, everyone, in the commentary, they're all military experts. They know instantly what that means. George and I gave a perfectly innocent, innocuous possibility of what he meant.
Right. Exactly. He didn't really mean anything very much. I mean, he gets up. He hardly has any sleep. He calls in to Fox and Friends. That's very early in the morning in the United States. So he's kind of barely awake. And he said, yeah, air support, maybe, we have the finest power in the world.
We got the best planes. Nobody can do it. But see, everybody, when you hear a statement like that, air support, we have the best plane. Well, nobody can compete with us. We have the best. He's stressing the latter part of that sentence. He's not stressing the first part. Don't you know him well enough?
Right. That's right. And right away, that becomes a story in the media. Oh, Trump has signed off on providing air support for the security guarantors, the coalition of the willing. He never said anything like that. He hadn't signed off on anything. He's just sort of, I don't know, spitballing
Yeah.
with his good friends at Fox and Friends.
He's pouring cream in his coffee and he's stirring it at the same time. He's
And
probably
that,
wearing slippers in a
that
robe.
yeah. And then he leaves it to this Elbridge Colby who says, I wouldn't count on us, to be honest. I mean, I think you need to do your own planning. I wouldn't wait on those F-35s arriving to support you in your mission.
But if your individual countries want to buy them, I'll get in line. We'll
Yeah,
set you up. We'll set you up. Okay.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
We'll set you up. Okay.
yeah. It's but, but so I think where we are now is that the peace process seems to have run out of steam. I think might be
Well,
a
yeah, it's run out of steam because the steam was based on inaccurate and false assumptions.
Right.
Okay. I mean, the Russians are saying, okay, what do you guys got to propose? I mean,
Right.
is the entire Western world based on a fragment of a Truth Social post?
Right.
We want clarification on that.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
No, the foundations to end this conflict, or I would argue that the foundations to end this conflict were established before the conflict even started.
Right.
Because I've been saying, and I think I'm going to be right, one way or another, we're going to end up with the treaty or ultimatum, whatever you want to call it, that was sent to NATO and to Washington on December 15th, 2021, is where we're basically going to land, logically speaking. But logic has had nothing to do with this whole tragedy.
Right.
Okay.
Right. No. I think it's that's right. So I think probably what happened in Anchorage now, because there's always been a mystery of what actually happened in Anchorage. I think the Russians just spelled out their position. I think
I
that's
do
all they
too.
did. That's why they
Yeah,
kind
and
of
that's what I posed to you a few days ago, is that I said, George, Your Excellency, I'm sorry, that the Russians just gave their framework, how they understand the conflict,
right,
where it came from, and where we stand right now, and how to end it. I think that's,
right,
that without a PowerPoint presentation and pictures.
right. And that's why I think it was they said, well, I think we might as well call it a day.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
mean,
That's
we
what
don't
I
need a
said.
lunch.
That's what I said. That's what I said. That we made our peace.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So, and I think that's really the only reason that the Russians did this. They wanted to make clear that was their position, and then that's it. And then it's up to Trump to sell it, to do what he can with it, because ultimately, I think the Russians do kind of like him. I mean, I think they do kind of think of him as better than the rest of the gang.
I don't think they see him as a maligned
Right.
force. Other people in the world will see Trump as a maligned force, obviously, but the Russians don't see him
No.
that way.
Yeah. Right.
If anything, George, the I don't have that kind of patience. Okay, that's enormous amount of patience to try
Right.
to get your
No,
point across.
yeah. No, that's it. They have that ability. In many ways, it's also frustrating, but they have that kind of a phlegmatic ability. They don't get worked up. They don't get very excited. They don't lose their temper and do crazy things. But they are kind of relentless. They just relentlessly keep repeating their points. This is what matters to us, and we're gonna stick to it. We're gonna stick to our
Well,
ground. This is what matters to us.
You just said something that I think that in the early days of our podcast, you said it, and I think it rings so true to today, is that, and this is what makes Western media go crazy, because there's every once in a while, like China or Russia, India, in many respects, Brazil right now. No, we're going to tell you what's interesting to us.
Right.
Because all we hear is what you're interested in and what you want to achieve.
Right.
No, you're going to listen to me.
Right.
I'm going to tell you what's important to me. And that's where the conversation starts and not ends. You know, Putin is a predator. Okay. Well, that's a good opening for a conversation, isn't it? You see what I mean, everyone? I mean, relentless. Look, this is where we stand when you can come calmly, sanely,
Right.
sit down at the table, like we tried to do, maybe, or we started to do
Right.
in Anchorage. We will make progress.
Right.
But if you don't hear and
Right.
you don't listen,
Right.
we're not going to make progress. And
No.
that's why I agree with George.
Yeah.
Well, the sugar rush is over. Oh, Maloney's rolling eyes. Okay, wow, that was so interesting to talk. Oh my God, she was rolling her eyes in the White House when Mertz was speaking. That's all over the place. Everybody's talking about Maloney's eyes.
Right. That's right.
Russians aren't.
No. 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 That's right. And this is, the great foreign ministers of the past, Molotov and Gromyko, they were very good at that. They just kept repeating the same thing, and that's it. They were just stuck by their positions, and that was it. And it used to drive the Western interlocutors mad, but that's it. They just said,
Well,
well,
it even drove Adolf Hitler mad. Okay, I mean, what was it? I don't know if it was a Soviet interpreter or it was a German interpreter, but I mean, Molotov spoke to Hitler like he was a provincial schoolmaster,
right,
and it exasperated Hitler. I mean, he that was when the Nazi juggernaut was at its peak. Okay, and you have this guy, this speckled guy,
yeah,
in
yeah, yeah.
a very
That was
dressed in
the
a very
time when I think,
dowdy way.
yeah, that was a problematic because that was, I think, in December 1940 when Molotov visited Berlin, and Hitler proposed a kind of, the Soviet Union join the anti-Comintern pact, become one of the Axis powers. We're going to divide up the world, and the British were bombing Berlin, and so Molotov thought, I don't know. I think we seem to be a long way off from winning the war, let alone dividing up the world. And he kind of left without signing anything. And that I think really just enraged.
And plus the secret protocols of the Molotov Ribbentrop Treaty was not going well.
Yeah,
Okay,
so,
they had a
right.
lot of
That's right. So that was that's right.
yeah, but that's another thing we always mention it. Trump supporters, his force of personality. He stopped 7 wars, isn't it?
Yeah, seven. I lost which seven, but
I do too because it
the
was
Magnificent Seven. Yeah.
because it was his force of personality. He's a force of nature.
Yeah.
Well, if you're a pundit and you're a booster, yeah, that sounds great, particularly when you're saying it to people that agree with you, okay? But it doesn't work that way. The United States sanctions, it gives tariffs, threats, violence, and I'm talking about against their friends.
Right, right. No, that's right. And the
Yeah, I
problem,
mean, Nord Stream 2, I mean, that wasn't, it wasn't a nudge. It wasn't oh, by the way. No, that's called hard power.
yeah, yeah, yeah. No, that's right. And I think Trump's problem when he talks about these seven wars is that nobody thinks that somehow Trump had anything to do with those
With any
seven.
of them.
Even if they could list them, they say Trump is going to be judged on this war, the Ukraine-Russia war. He's going to be judged on Gaza. Those are the ones he's not. No one's going to judge him on Rwanda and Congo. I think, what the hell's that got to do with Trump? India and Pakistan. What the hell's that got to do with Trump? Oh, what was the other one? Cambodia and Thailand.
Yeah, they're going to build statues to Trump in Cambodia and Thailand. Watch. Okay. No, I'm joking. Okay. No, they're not. Okay.
That's right. So that's going and of course the Iran thing itself is, that's still on the boil and could we don't know that way. That's what Trump is going to be judged on. So, I wouldn't keep putting in calls to Norway for your Peace Prize. I think I don't think any Peace Prize is coming so long as the wars that are the most important for Trump, the ones that he's most actively involved in, are not going anywhere near to
Well,
conclusion.
and we'll wrap it up here. This is where we are right now. This isn't a U.S.-Russia standoff. This is the Europeans with their adopted bastard son Zelensky, taunting Trump to go full Biden. That's what this is all about. That's where we are right now.
Yeah, exactly. That's I think right. I think Zelensky is doing it, and the Europeans essentially want an escalation. That's the plan here. An escalation is saying, look, the president, Mr. Trump, you went the extra mile for peace, and Putin, he slapped you down. He insulted you. He humiliated you. He made you an international laughingstock. What are you going to do about it, Mr. President? I mean, that's the line they're taking with him.
And as you react, I'll hold your beer.
That's right, exactly. Can you, are you going to just sit there and allow Putin to make fun of you, to make you an international laughingstock? I don't know. What is the world coming to? You're going to allow him to do that.
And that's when Meloni rolls her eyes. It's such a circus, okay? And again, two thoughts come into my mind. I hate when I'm right. I hate when we're right, because escalation is still on the agenda, everyone. We were slapped down. Oh, no. You guys, you've missed the plot. I don't know. This is going to be wound up. All the last leg. Oh, this will be over in February. This will be over in May. Okay. None of that has been true. The second thought that comes into my mind, the tip jar. Okay. Do you know how many slides we went through here? We went through 50.
Ooh.
Yeah. I got one. I saw it. It's only there for like a nanosecond. It's only there because George goes real quick. He won't notice. Okay. Well, I notice. That's 50 slides. I didn't do that work. George did that work.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm being serious right now. Okay. It's a lot of work to do this.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's true, and that's the point that the dogs keep emphasizing. They said that has to be remunerated, because the dogs say, well, actually, we did the work. He's just taking the credit. But that the tip jar, as Buddy has said many times, it doesn't fill by itself. I mean, that's the buddyism. It doesn't get filled by itself. So whatever you have lying around, not doing anything useful, $100 bills, just all of it.
For them, it's the indivisibility of prosperity.
Exactly, the indivisibility of prosperity. So please, everything into the tip jar. We're very grateful for all of your help, friendship, and support. The more you're able to donate, the more of these videos we can make, the more we can improve the technology, and above all, we'll let the dogs know that their work will not go unremunerated, because I think they're feeling a little indignant. So remember, if you like the gaggle, please like, share, and subscribe. See you soon. Bye-bye.